Hello, can you hear me right now? Um, there's still a delay. Welcome to Interbeing Art channel, if this is your first time. Um, Hello if you're here watching this right now. I managed to get the delay down to like 10 seconds as opposed to like 30 seconds as it was before. So your comments will be delayed a little bit. Um, Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today. Right now, we're in my bedroom, me and Kit's new bedroom. We moved here in September. T Today, we're going to talk about anarcho-primitivism and anarcho-transhumanism, and throw in some technogaianism in there too. These are all like really cool concepts that I want to elaborate on from my last video. It's been weighing on me. Been going through some things in the meantime. Is anybody here? Does anybody want to signal me to if the sound's okay? Um, that would be great. Just anybody out there, just say hello. Okay, so let's get into this. Um, oh, I forgot to explain. The reason for the delay is that YouTube has this new thing where you have to go through an app in order to go onto YouTube Live. You have to stream from an app, and the app is fine, but for whatever reason, YouTube has this latency. So it's kind of annoying for me. I'm not sure how much you'll be able to notice it. Hey, N1M H411 a day. Nim holiday, maybe? Holiday? I can hear you. It's good to hear from you. Thank you for confirming that. Okay, so yes, and I also want to say for new viewers in the future, on these subjects, I am not an expert. I'm just really interested in them, and I've been like reading about them and listening to podcasts more like recently within the last few months. So it's not like you're listening to somebody who has years of experience or whatever. So people who know of these concepts for a long time hopefully won't get too frustrated with me. But I want to bring this to a broader light and like share some ideas about it too that I don't hear brought up, and also like vocalize for these groups and try to like help bring awareness to them too. Um, just be another voice out there. Um, and yeah, so but I will briefly explain for viewers of Interbeing Art that without going too deep into it, I've been doing less content recently on account of me going through some hard times right now. I'm being diagnosed with PTSD at the moment, and I've actually dropped out of NASCAD, and I haven't told a lot of people yet. And haven't been talking to a lot of my friends right now, so it's just been like really hard for me at this moment, and I feel um, I really miss talking to everybody here on YouTube. But I think um, doing live streams for the next little while will help me get some thoughts out there, and we can actually like um, get closer as a community in order to discuss these like concepts that I think are really important in this time. So I am really excited about that, to be doing more live streams, and I'll get more used to it and warmed up as I go. Holly Wolf, it's good to see you. Some smarts here. Yeah, so that's enough of the update with me. I'll be okay, and I'll elaborate more some other time about that. But I wanted to put the cards on the table about that, about me suffering from PTSD out there, even though it's hard for me to talk about right now. So we'll get back into the concept of the live stream. Okay, so take a drink first. Okay, so I wanted to talk about binaries and dialectics. I got a little bit of a script here. It's not, it's just like points that I'll bring up, and then I'm just gonna try to remember what I meant by them. But here, I want to show you, because of this new app, I can do this, where, there, I bring up the screen, and then you can see my script here, and you get this cool effect. Now you can see what's on my screen, so that's a really cool new thing, and I can like drag it all around. So that'll be fun to play with in the future as I try to figure it out, but we don't need that right now. Get out of here. Okay. Anyways. So, first thing I wanted to talk about is something I didn't elaborate on enough in my original video, is about binaries and dialectics. Right now, and I've definitely had much of this tendency in the past, and it's a tendency in all humans, that we lump things into binaries, and this has been a long thing, I mean, a long developing thing. It's one of the earliest Greek philosophies, actually. This system of opposites, you know, and you see here, I mean here, this really demonstrates why binaries can be so dangerous, because unconsciously we kind of make these strong associations with things. So when we have these binaries of, you know, for example, gender, the big binary issue right now, by in our minds saying that they are two distinct separate things and they are opposites, we tend to associate other opposites with that, such as black and white, good and evil, chaotic and orderly. You know, that's when it starts to get really dangerous, and you know, that's really highlighted in you know, something like Jordan Peterson's book. What was it? An Antidote to Chaos: 12 Rules for Life. For one, this like the pure idiocy of thinking you could make just such a short, limited number for all the rules for life. Like, there you go, you got a boat, you're sailing. I don't know. I thought that was kind of ridiculous, but the more kind of scary thing that he's implying, an antidote to chaos, which he associates with the feminine, that's pretty misogynistic underneath the surface. It's well, I mean, it's not really that far under the surface, but it's just not completely evident if you didn't realize he associates these binaries. And pulling it back to relevant in this conversation of transhumanism and anarcho-primitivism, I kind of see them as opposites, because one is calling for the rejection of technology and going back to a state where humans were, and I mean still are in some parts of the world, more feral or primitive. I mean, I really don't like those words. I say like primitive in terms of technology. I'll elaborate on that very soon. And then on the other hand, we have transhumanism and technogaianism, and that's a full embrace of technology to the point where they actually want to replace everything we have. It's like such a radical change. It seems like it's like completely opposite to anarcho-primitivism, and yeah, so there's the binary, and when we have a binary type of thinking, we think of these two things as total opposites, not connecting. But in order to have the whole like totality of the universe thinking, the totality, kind of a totality, screwing up my words, the totality philosophy, where you bring these opposites together, and there's like a point where these things mesh. Even if it's faint and maybe not super evident at first. And because maybe they're not so opposite, but actually form something that could be done in harmony. And that's where dialectics come in, right? So dialectics is a slippery concept, and that's why I love it. It's because we need to embrace this more ambiguous kind of thing. When our brains tend to make structures, ideological structures, and we have to like try our best to like challenge them and avoid the tendency, or at least hesitant of the tendency to just replace it with something else, you know, kind of like, oh, instead of smoking, I'm gonna vape. I don't know, maybe that was a bad analogy, but it happens with lots of things. I actually wrestled with this for a while when I was younger. I would log on to like atheist groups and I'd be like, isn't this still a belief? Aren't you just like trading one belief for God for another belief that there is no God? Isn't that still a belief? And it's just like, yeah, technically, but you know, it's like at some point you have to, it's like kind of like an anti-belief, and that's kind of that's kind of what anarchy is. It's like it's a rejection of the order placed in front of you, especially when it doesn't have your interests in mind clearly, in terms of our society. Okay, so I'll talk more about dialectics some other time, because it bleeds into my concept that I want to, or like a philosophical concept I want to talk to you about some other time. But yeah, dialectics is, in short, more of like a conversation in between two seemingly opposites or binaries. It's like kind of like finding where they meet, and not necessarily in like a centrist kind of position. No, not centrism. We don't equate the opposites for being equal, at least subjectively. I mean, it gets hard when you want to say ideologies are objectively bad. I mean, there are objectively bad ideologies, but yeah, it just gets so it gets so hard to distinguish sometimes subjective and objectivity. But to clear our minds, sorry, you can see I'm a little bit foggier than I normally am. So dialectics is like a conversation where we can try to have an understanding and see where these things all meet. And moving on from dialectics, I wanted to stress that because I see this confusion popping up a lot, and I want to clarify this for people new to these concepts like Anarcho-Primitivism and Anarcho-transhumanism, is that they are not political, they are schools of anarchistic schools of thought of anarchy. So they're kind of like something you attach on to like a political philosophy of like, or like how you envision a political structure could go. For example, there's communism, then there's capitalism, then there's anarchy, and all sorts of in terms of those anarchy subgroups, there's anarcho-communism, anarcho-syndicalism, anarcho-mutualism. These are types of anarchy that are political systems. That was the word I was trying to go for, political systems. Whereas anarcho-primitivism and anarcho-transhumanism, they're schools of thought within the anarchy circles. So you can technically have amprim mutualists. I mean, I doubt it, but you could have like amprim ancoms, for example, where they agree with the ancom political structure, but with an amprim point of view, you know what I mean? Anprim to me seems, it tends to be more individualist, but I'm getting ahead of myself. But yeah, so anarchist schools of thought, not political systems. That's what I was trying to say to sum it up. I also wanted to kind of advocate my point of view on the subject of identification. One of the things I regret about my last video is that I'm pretty sure I left in a part where I said I identify with being an anarcho-transhumanist, which I don't really. I mean, I really like that philosophy, but it's like you really can't reduce your identity to one thing, and it's like, and if you do, it's usually like in the context of something. For example, to my boss, I am a cleaner. That's my identity. To other students, I am also an ASCAD student painter. That's part of my identity. But like your identity is different for everyone. But the problem I see with being like I am anprim, whereas I tend to be like I really resonate with a lot of anprim philosophy, and I find it very interesting. I wouldn't call myself an anprim unless I was like, I don't know, like gonna hold a debate amongst anprims or something like that, because then I could be like, yeah, I'm really interested in school of thought. But really, I think pushing for the ambiguity is kind of like where the new frontier is going. It's like trying to go into the anti-zone, where it's like, yeah, technically it is a philosophy and an ideology to reject ideology, and reject identity and stuff like that. Technically, that's an identity too, but it's like it's one of those paradoxes you can't get around. It's like it's the anti-identity, it's the anti-philosophy. Anarchy seems to me to be the anti-system. I like it. Okay, the next point I wanted to bring up is something I didn't stress in the last video, and I'm going to stress in this one, is that I really think that psychedelics can really aid in both of these fields of study, fields of thought, fields of thought, frolicking through these fields of thought. And I think doing psychedelics in fields is great. It just like really in any field, it like just broadens ideas and stuff like that. But like there are like some specific, very specific common effects, or effects of aftermath of taking these things that I think could very well greatly aid in both of these fields of study. I'm studying them. I know there's no degree in it, but yeah, wanted to really address the eco crisis that we're in. Of course, like this is like informing all aspects of my life now, of like what is it to be talking in front of a camera in 2019 during the eco crisis. I mean, technically we've been in an eco crisis for much longer. It's just that it's becoming more recognized. But like, is it already too late? And this is why I'm like bringing up political thought instead of just talking about psychedelics. I mean, psychedelics are still going to play a part. Me psychonauts. But but these feel very relevant and important concepts to me. These concepts. Yeah, and I also wrote "fuck the system." Yes, so the reason why I'm bringing up anarchy is because that is the political system that resonated me the most and really brought me out of thinking that, you know, there really is only a two-party system uh, in regards of Canada and America and most of westernized worlds, countries, I mean. So like it really like instills in your mind that the, you know, to really be far left is to vote green or to like vote like, you know, for something other than the two parties. But to really think like in a way that like this democracy that we have in these countries, I mean, I think we really do feel it, especially among us lower class people, that this democracy voting, it just, we have very, very little say in what's going on. And so, of course, we all share this high anxiety while we watch the world crumble before us and we can't do anything about it. This is something that's just like fucking sitting on my chest, on my shoulders, everywhere I go. And just because things are growing more and more dire, and so like it's really led me to research our history or of colonialism and all sorts of important political things that I think needs to be sought out and discovered. And so I'll probably be sharing a lot of what I've learned with you, and maybe I can point people in the right direction. But these are things I'm juggling with too. And before, like with my videos, I really wanted to come out and like, you know, put on that performance of being like, I know this, I'm professional, but I'm just like, for now, I kind of have to like let the wall down a little bit and just be kind of more conversational between my friends, my fellow psychonauts. I haven't been looking at the comments. I'm so sorry. Yeah, JP, right? Primitivism, that's right. Becoming mechanical. Humanist transhumanist. You want to keep the human body, but maybe advance it a little bit. Is that what you're trying to say? We'll talk about that when we get into the transhuman section. Yeah, so fuck this capitalist system right now, because it is the problem of why there is an eco crisis to begin with. They're trying to make it sound like we're just, you know, using too much plastic straws or something like that. But, you know, they can't hide the fact that it is directly from specifically 100 companies. There's like 100 CEOs. That's 100 people that's destroying all life on this planet. And they're trying to extract as much power and wealth and resources from the planet as possible. And they're just like immensely wasteful because they're trying to get as much money as possible. And money is power, and they just are power hungry. So that's the system that we're living in. Where these people live, I'd like to know. I'm just kidding. But I advocate for a system where the majority has the say, and as much as the majority as possible. And anybody that is able to comprehend that they're even in the system should be able to have a say. And anarcho-communism is just seems to be the best step forward. Although I have been considering being just a traditional communist. Again, that's why I try not to like identify as one thing or another. I advocate for anarcho-communism. That is my utopia, and maybe I'll talk about that some other time. But for now, let's talk about anprims, anarcho-primitivism. I'm not going to re-say what I said last time, or like define as in-depthly as I did before. I'm gonna like do some deal of assuming you are aware of this, but in short, anarcho-primitivism is this anarchy school of thought where we kind of look at it from the point of view as our like furthest ancestors that resembled our human form, that at some point we shifted from hunter-gatherers to agriculture, from like little small gardens to big fields of food that you had to defend. One of the oldest, among the oldest structures we've ever found made by humans, I believe it's the grain mill at Jericho, and it had this platform that Terence McKenna talked about, that it was used for dropping rocks on people's head. It was like a defense mechanism. So you could see there, like that's where like it really became like there's a shift from like we are living in this world and we're trying to survive as a group, to being like this is mine and I decide who gets to have it, and like that kind of like huge ego trip. Although I think, you know, it probably did happen before that, that like, you know, people would start to claim ownership or like territory, or just be territorial in general. I think humans were probably more ruthless back then, if anything. But who can say? That was before documentation. Um, but yeah, so anarcho-primitivists kind of advocate for at least a somewhat return to that state. They advocate for rewilding, deindustrialization, decolonialism, basically a rejection of all of our culture that it is right now, to be like, I guess, either very small bands or just like totally individualist, just be a, a person out in the woods, you know, living their life. And it's really frustrating that in a lot of places that is actually illegal, to collect rainwater, to not have a house. It's actually illegal to not own property. It's just absolutely wild, but not anarcho wild, bad wild. So yeah, so here are some critiques, common critiques of anprims that I kind of want to argue against. One of them is that anprims are just romantic, and I don't think it is just romantic. I think that's kind of like a cheap reduction. I've always had my feelings hurt when people accuse me of being overly romantic. I do see how it can become a problem when you like really romanticize a very specific vision of the way things should be, when it's not really in harmony with the reality of the moment, of like what can actually happen. It's just not really feasible. And yeah, I've definitely been overly romantic about some things too, but it is not inherently romantic, and I think it's a genuine, um, a genuine. I don't know. I don't really want to say need, but I guess a tendency to reach back to our roots. Um, there's a big part of us that want like novelty and new things, but then there's a lot of us that like does want to do like some really primitive stuff, such as dancing loose and control, doing drugs, getting tattoos, body piercings, um, camping, you name it. I think sports even is just like these things that connect us back to what it really feels like to be alive. And I think there's a degree of being romantic, but not. I wouldn't. I don't. It's not a. Or rather, you shouldn't totally denounce this ideology based on that. The other one is that it's ableist, and this is off the assumption, based off the assumption commonly attributed to anprims, that they advocate that we do just drop all of our technology, our clothes, and just walk into the woods and live our lives as that. And like that, there's a part of me that's like, hey, that would be pretty rad. But yeah, I think we'd all agree that that would be disastrous because it would be very, very ableist. To, I think I'm healthy enough that I might be able to like just walk out into the woods bare naked and survive, but I don't think everybody would be able to. It's definitely not feasible for most people. Some people just can't walk up hills. Some people, um, need medication, and that needs industries to build them. I'll talk about industries a little bit more. But they don't necessarily advocate that people go outside of their abilities. Um, it's just, I'll talk more about the point of view, but again, it's like, it is just a point of view, a critique of society, but not necessarily advocating that, they're, um, oh, actually, the next one really bleeds into this, is that they're fascists. um, there are such thing as eco-fascists, basically not only wanting the earth to be preserved, but their race, sorry, their ethnicity. I always just laugh a little bit because it just seems so ridiculous that it's even a thing, but it's real. So it's sad. It's really, really sad. um, but I should bring up Pol Pot now, because in Cambodia in the 1970s, there was a horrific genocide in Cambodia, um, and it was administered through a Marxist, a communist, which is just it's hard to like really grip what his motivations were. But he was totally an agriculturalist. He there's another word for it, but I forget. I can't be overly fancy with my words right now, I guess. But he had this strong emphasis on agriculture and forced everybody into doing agriculture, and ended up putting people in camps and stuff like that. And it was just they were just like they ended up killing like over 1 million people, like it could be millions of people, um, with a fucking hatchet instead of with bullets, just to save the bullets. And it's like, it's just so bewildering how these things happen. But that's anprims are so much less about seizing control. For one of the thing, they're anarchist, which means abolishment of hierarchies, and any anarchy that says we need to maintain hierarchies, um, you just kick it to the curb. It's not anarchy, such as anarchy or anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-monarchy. These are just oxymorons, but those people exist somehow. Um, yeah, so I would like to look more into what happened with Pol Pot and like really see what his motivations were. But yeah, he wanted to like, he also had like a very racist attitude and purist fascist attitude. Anprims, on the other hand, they're much more individualist. They don't want to force people out into the wild and out of their habitats or whatever. They just advocate that we be like start stepping back and like not being able to get in touch with our primitive sides. Yeah, so it also a common critique is that it's purist, elitist, and in the way of that it's implying that technology is like de-evolution. And I will admit I have actually met some anprims like this, but I don't think it is inherent to anarcho-primitivism that people will look down at you for like not being able to survive in the wilderness or something like that. So not all of them. It's not inherently like that. And last but not least, in terms of critiques, and this is one I really wanted to talk about because it's important, is that it's actually racist. Primitivist is a racist term. And I alluded to this earlier in the stream too. So the thing is like there are societies that live this kind of lifestyle of like surviving with minimal technology, and the English word for that is like primitive, tribal. We have like a very awful palette to describe these things. This is just a really good highlight of the boundaries of our language right now. So I've actually been trying to think of other words to describe this. I also run into this problem with tribal art, which is really bad. It's basically anything that's pre-colonized is tribal art. So Mayan art, Incan art, all Malaysia and all the indigenous artists is just known as tribal art. It's just like this big wide label that's basically non-Western art and non-Eastern art. It's pretty disgusting. I will say it's non-Eastern, Western, indigenous art is it does have like a very similar quality that is almost completely lacking in Western and Eastern art, in my opinion. Like I'm really drawn to the art of the Maya, and the reason why it's I should maybe say why it's so bad to call it tribal is that a lot of these indigenous peoples, they are nations, they are empire. Some of them were empires, but they were reduced because they didn't have the current technology like the ships and the guns that Western and Eastern people do. So they were assumed to be savage or primitive, like prehistorical. You know what I mean? And that implies that history is Western and Eastern. And everything outside of that, that's like primitive. That's not even in history. You're literally stepping back in time going over there. And now you can see why this language is actually pretty dangerous. When people that are in this current moment are living this way, they're not back in time. They're right here in the present, So implying that they're back in time, that's very elitist and unconsciously leads to racism. Prejudice. I admire people in those living that lifestyle. I was born of a different path. Once you're born into this system, you're not forced. Like technically, you can learn to break out of this system and leave. But goddamn, is it difficult, and very few people do it. I mean, that book Into the Wild? That was a very Amprim move. That was some fucking praxis. Anprims are all about praxis. And, this guy got a fucking book written about him. I'm sure, like, there's lots of other people that have done that. But it just goes to show, it's like, how rare it is. The odds of anybody breaking out of this system right now is fucking low. Got some recommendations for anprims. Kevin Tucker wrote a book called The Cult of Personality, Ayahuasca, Colonialism, and the Death of a Healer. I listened to the podcast, didn't listen or read the book, but it's really, really important stuff to know about. The death of this healer, this shaman who was shot over like some money deal, but like even though she was a prominent shaman, the only reason why we know about it is because the people, the locals, they they executed the guy that shot her, the shaman, and yeah, so because they shot this Canadian that went down there to South America. Wish I could give you more details, but I didn't really try to memorize this. The stuff that I really try to communicate to people, I like try my hardest to memorize. I just like wish I like had that like super absorbent memory, but not always. So like, and also considering what the ayahuasca trade in South America means in the context of colonial history. And I'll talk about colonial history in a little bit. Maybe not go all the way. The other recommendation is Layla Abdel Rahim. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that. Abdel Rahim. Sorry. I'm so sorry. Her book is Wild Children, Domesticated Dreams, Civilization, and the Birth of Education. Here, maybe I can even show you these texts on screen. There they are. You got them? There. How's everybody doing? Get my script back here. All right. So, rewilding. Rewilding, this is where the psychedelics come in. Yeah, a couple anprims I listened to didn't really talk about this. I'd like to join in the conversation of rewilding and really put forth that something that could really aid in rewilding is psychedelics. There was a disconnect I had with nature before I took mushrooms that I just don't have anymore, and I almost feel like I don't know if I could ever get without it. Mushrooms and specifically really strengthens this connection to plant life, flora, and trees. It's just it's almost indescribable. Well, I mean, it is. It's an emotion that you just don't get without mushrooms, and I've just had such intense experiences bonding with trees that I actually like made me feel like I had some made me feel like I was very weird or alien. But I feel like this is something, a connection that all humans should have or experience. I highly recommend going out in nature and taking 2 grams of mushrooms. Depending on your tolerance, it's different for everyone. If you have problems chewing them up, maybe you can get the capsules or grind them up. I wouldn't recommend drinking tea and then going out for a walk, just because the mushroom tea, like, I found that you like sweat it out a little bit. It like feels much more tactile on the skin, or at least I did, and it didn't last as long. It was like it came on quicker and left quicker. So like it's hard to like drink the tea and get out there if it comes on quicker and leaves quicker, right? Um, but yeah, so I would recommend that. There's lots of different ways of rewilding. For the concept of rewilding, it's basically it's I would define it as more than camping. Really trying to get your survival skills on and start considering like, goddamn, if this society collapses and I can't go to the grocery store anymore, uh, I got to be able to fend for myself. And you would have the advantage that a lot of people don't in that situation. I'm not saying that society will collapse, but I do feel this impending doom, like something big is going to happen very soon. And I think anprims do too. They very much believe, as well as most Marxists and leftists, believe that this society is doomed to collapse. It's like the fundamental of Marxism, and yeah, so rewilding can be a form of preparing for that. Um, and their idealized, this is where their point of view um, really challenges the political system of, for example, ANCOM, where you would have like these small communes, about like 150 people living on each commune, and you know, there's different roles and different particular skills each commune has, uh, and anprims advocate that we deindustrialize, that like humans are just not meant to be working in factories and mass producing things. Um, it would be much different in an ANCOM society because you wouldn't be producing as much as possible. You would only be producing what you need. You might only need to produce like what people like actually ask and order for, because you know your incentives would be much different if you didn't have. Yeah, this is one of the biggest things about a income society, is that there would be no money. It would all be done through mutual aid, that everybody would want to work with each other. A lot of people argue that people are lazy and wouldn't want to do that. Other people have already refuted that. I don't think I'm going to get right into it. But yeah, so getting back to my point, if the anprims were in this ANCOM society, they would be like, hey, we don't want to work in this factory whatsoever. And I, I think it leads me to believe that, you know, we should really minimalize industrialization. But we can't completely deindustrialize. And I don't think most anprims would argue that we completely deindustrialize. For example, we still need to be producing penicillin. You know, we need to be producing uh, EpiPens or hospital gear, stuff like that. You know, like, not every individual community would be able to produce these things, everything that we need. So like we would, the communes would also be helping each other, but like they'd be broken up, just so people can have, you know, that limit of familiarity with people. But you know, I can see some communes being even bigger too. Oh my utopia. Yeah, so yeah, that's the limit of deindustrialization for me. I also wanted to really relate to how awful factories are right now. Even in Canada, people always say like, "Oh man, we got it way better than China." I mean, China is certainly horrific, but that doesn't mean what we got is anything to really like skip and cheer about. Um, every factory experience I've had was just so degrading, humiliating, um, gross, depressing. It, what's some more negative words I can throw out there? I don't know. It really felt soul-sucking. But the thing is that I always did have a degree of fun learning about the warehouses and actually doing the jobs for a little bit. But it got crushing really fast when, you're like, oh, I have to do this 8 hours a day for the next few days, and then I get a couple days off, and then I have to do it again for the next 5 days. And for the rest of my life, day one walking into a warehouse and you meet this fucking guy you think should be on the deathbed. He's fucking in his 150s. And he's like, oh yeah, I remember when I was your age. I was already working here for like 3 years. And it just fucking terrified me. I just popped in, but I guess my issue with anprim is, this is from Milkshake Turtle 79. I just popped in, but I guess my issue with anprim, even being an anarchist myself, is that I feel it completely eliminates those who are disabled who need medications. Yeah, and that's the ableism I referred to earlier. I would like to hear that more in anprim conversations of like, how do we have a feral life for people who are disabled, who don't have the same abilities. That's the thing. Like, I think there needs to be some compromise when it comes to technology. We can't completely abandon it. I should say too that there are anprims that do advocate that we reject all technology, even spoken language, just like throw it all in the trash. And then it will get into fascism when people want to enforce that onto somebody else. But if we're truly anarchists and like seeking equality, we should really bring into the conversation of how we address ableism, and how we can make it so that everybody can get in touch with their roots, even if you can't walk or can't see or whatever your inability is, or like, and it obviously can't be for everyone too. That's the other thing, which we have to just take for with a grain of salt. There are just some people with psychological types that just aren't meant for thinking or living in these types of feral ways. Start fire hunts. Yes, learning to fish, start fires, hunt, etc., etc. is so important. Yes, Alamaza, you got it. Sure love going into nature. Alan Mazza, my good buddy. Yeah, I'm on the border of communism and anarchism. Yeah, going into nature is good. And especially as someone who wants to pursue space science, I don't think it's fair to take those things away from people. Milkshake Turtle 79. Yeah, exactly. That's why I think this dialectic is really going to be important, and I'll get into transhumanism soon. Even though I've spent almost an hour talking about Anarcho Primitivism, I plan on talking for maybe at least another hour, so I can talk about transhumanism and technogaianism. Yeah, and yeah, space travel and like so many other cool things are on the horizon. Like when we get into the technology bit, it'll be awesome. Oh yeah, you said it right here, Milkshake Turtle 79. I think also that we can achieve the best of both worlds by using green technology and automation. We have the resources, but capitalism doesn't allow it. Exactly. Took the words right out of my mouth. Thank you. The industrial working class, Alan Mazza says, needs to kick the bosses out, seize the factories themselves, and spread out the work to all the unemployed, reducing the 40-hour week. Exactly. That is the leftist point of view of like how we unionize and turn this triangle hierarchy upside down, and eventually, I mean. Sorry, I'm not going to get too much into that. That's like a huge C. But yes, that's what we need to do as anarchists, as communists, as leftists. Sorry to be off topic, Crumbly says. Just wanted to say your paintings are so rad, and so is your channel. Also, yeah, factories are brutal. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I haven't been able to paint the last little while, and I feel pretty bad about that. But I'm gonna be painting soon. I got one on the go, and we got the studio almost completely set up, so we'll be getting some more of those to you soon. Thank you. Um, Nim Halliday says, can't do without some level of society, ignorance, or doctrine of supremacy. Yeah, it's like that's a real debate. Can you like ever really truly defeat fascism or ignorance or these supremacy? But it's the idea is to have a system that recognizes it and minimizes it to like where it's really minimize the threat as much as possible, and preferably much preferably without violence. But yeah, I agree. I think we do have to face that supremacy, some fascism. It's actually as hard as my tongue, as hard as it is to admit it. It might be a part of all of us. There's like a little fascist in all of us, is what my teacher said. Um, you know what? Actually, I want to dedicate this live stream to my teacher. He was a great leftist, and I was still continuing to go to his class even though I dropped out, and I was gonna just audit it, and he had to end the class because he has some form of cancer that he needs chemo treatment for, and he was my favorite teacher I ever had, but he gave me a lot of like good leftist points of view that that needs to be considered when battling this capitalist system. But to reel back, what a concept he actually told the class is that there's might be a fascist in every one of us, a little fascist, and so you have to like battle that internally when you like want to like enforce your way of life on other people's that need or that need for supremacy. And so it's something that needs to be battled internally within everyone. um, we I think human nature has evolved some very toxic behaviors, which is evident when you see these states bombing each other and stuff like that. And on and on and on. Shrooms help without hurting disabled. Yeah, that's true. And also, shrooms and other psychedelics have been known to help people with like chronic pain, speech impediments. Excuse me. So, psychedelics really greatly aid in a lot of psychological disorders, and how much is psychological is the real question. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good point too. For example, if you're in a wheelchair and you're able to some degree get into some form of like flat nature, maybe you go to Alberta and take a few mushrooms. Bring your wheelchair charger and fucking camp and go to town. Man, that would be fucking you getting connected with your roots, that's for sure. Holly Wolf says, kind of weird question, but what's your thoughts on Anonymous 5th of November? I don't have any thoughts on that because I don't know what it is. So if you let me know, I will give you my immediate thoughts, or maybe I'll touch upon that in another live stream. I hope to be doing these live streams more often. I'm sorry about that. Humanity's tendency to self-improve would allow us to survive in such a way as to beyond those primitive systems of society. Yeah, at least to avoid the bad or the negative aspects of that way of living. I certainly do see where people's angle when they say it's overly romantic, that before there was agriculture, life was perfect. And I think in some degree there might have been a era where there was a paradise. I know that's like what Terence McKenna like envisioned, but I feel like that's kind of his projected ideal utopian past, where there was like small bands of people. They got along friendly, and they had group orgies every full moon, and there was like the group took care of the children, and there you go, fucking paradise. You had like no one was forcing you to do anything. It was great. And but the truth is that like humans throughout all of history, recorded history, have been brutal. And I mean, like we definitely do have tendencies that are very loving and uh, really great and wholesome. But then there's other sides of us that are like I don't even want to speak about right now because they're just so horrible. um, and I think that probably existed before agriculture, I gotta say. People probably got murdered and all sorts of things before agriculture. So it definitely overly romantic if you think otherwise. Um, the cat almost got out. um, yeah. So what was I saying? Um, yeah. So that's where the dialectics come in. Is that there has to be. I think there is benefit to have that amprim sort of view, but without being overly ruling about it. Like if you go over the top and actually reject all of technology and force other people to do the same, or even if you don't force other people to do the same, if you just like reject all technology, like you have to be smart about it. And I think people always characterize anprims of not being smart about it, but there's more to anarcho-primitivism than I think people give credit for. Um, have I watched any Eric Dubé's videos on space? No, I haven't, but I'll keep that in mind and I'll watch it because I love watching space videos. Actually, on a short aside, I guess we'll go back into the transhumanism. I'll talk about it in a little bit. We'll talk about space in a bit. Your ache. I like The Purge. I don't like the Purge movies. Those are really bad. JK. Okay. Have you read Peterson? No. Instead of comparing about the current society, he advocates cleaning your room. It's really fucking awful. Yeah. No. In all seriousness, fascists and right-wingers advocate strict class domination from above. Psychedelics won't change the world, but I think that they can revolutionize human culture. Yeah, I'd agree. I agree to some degree. I will talk more about how I think psychedelics can affect society in a little bit. And then Nim Halliday says, would allowing psychedelics use change the way we interact interculturally to enable a globalist sort of representative thing? I do think we need to be more transcultural and intercultural. Um, I think having these strong associations of culture is kind of like repelling people apart. Like on one hand, I do really appreciate diversity, and I think that'll be natural. Um, but I think people cling to their culture really hard in like defense. Like they don't want it to be interfered with other cultures. Um, and it's weird psychology. It's like, and it's all formed through psychological associations that our human brains have the tendency to do. For what I envision, it's a work in progress, but I'm thinking like, believe it or not, an app that will replace a centralized nation and put it on the interweb where people can be doing van life, reject material possessions and stuff like that as much as possible, and connect with other people doing the same, and like create our own society through this app that rejects capitalism. Again, work in progress. It probably wouldn't work. I don't know, but I do like the idea of centralizing on the interweb, instead of like having like a parliament or something like that. And then that way, like imagine if everybody had a seat at parliament. Imagine that, you know? I could be right here and be voting on key issues. That's the utopia we are striving for. Globalists, um, uh, and I think of it more like of like Pangea or Gaia, like being like having a totality of like just being human beings. Globalists or globalism is usually used, in my experience, is usually used in referring to people who want to own the world. Maybe like the Rothschilds in that conspiracy theory where this family that owns all the central banks, they're like basically own 99.999% of the world, and this is kind of like, if some people are like, oh, we don't want globalists, but like, if it's true, capitalism, like, there's people that own the banks and shit like that. We're already living in a globalist society, um, in terms of people owning the world, but we want to reject ownership, um, which does get into some sticky situations, but it's not. I think it's something that can be worked out. Let's get back to it. Um, I might have to take a pee break here in a sec. Yes, so rewilding, deindustrialization, colonial history. I don't think I want to get too far into this just because it's a deep dive, but colonial history is just absolutely brutal. Um, so the way I want to get more into politics of the indigenous, that's why I can't say too much about this. But in terms of like North America, as far as I've learned, is that they were kind of they were nations, but they weren't tied to the land. They didn't have states. They had like regions of territory, but they were like loose borders. Nobody, like, as far as I know, nobody actually like wrote it in and like mapped it out. And if you stepped over this line, there's border control or some shit like that. Um, and a lot of these nations intermixed, and there were fights and squabbles, but there wasn't like this whole need for conquering territory. um, I mean, that did happen more toward like Latin America and South America with the Mayans and the Incas. um, and I'm sure it did happen all throughout the history, like fucking like what, 200,000 years humans beings have been living on the Americas. um, but yet, it didn't exist before Columbus. JK. JK. That's just like how Western culture often kind of depicts it. Um, yeah, it totally took a lot of indigenous peoples off guard when they were like, this land is mine. Thought it was a joke. How the fuck do you own land? You know? And then they got the guns out and then learned how. But that's the thing. We kind of have to like reject this like possession. Dialectics is not completely entirely toxic, but we have to like find out where the medium is. So they come over, colonialists come over with Europeans to America, as I'm referring to, but even throughout Africa and America. Sorry, keep getting off the subject or track. Western colonialists come with axiology, ontology, and epistemology. Epistemology. Is that how you say it? Anyways, you know, epistemology. Sometimes I forget. Okay, anyways, axiology is the theory of value, and Westerners, they really had high value for gold. That was an association that indigenous Americans didn't really have. That's for one example. And this theory of value was imposed on the people. They valued the white race over the indigenous race, and by saying that they're primitive, they're backwards, they're separate, all these ways of separating things, like the binaries, separating in our minds that they're completely opposite things instead of having like a dialectic conversation. So their ontology, their theory of reality totally rejected theirs, and the epistemology, their theory of knowledge, was also quite different. For those of you who don't know, a lot of treaties in Canada and in America, the indigenous form of record keeping of those treaties is through word of mouth, and that's equally as valid as the European colonialist form of treaty, which wrote it down in writing, and we have that form of documentation. But the indigenous have the speech form. So that's like just one way of epistemology, or different. So, but like with these three things, the colonialists imposed onto indigenous, they had this, specifically their axiology and ontology. Their theory of that reality was that their axiology was right, that white race people were superior, etc., and hence justified all the horrible, horrendous things that they did. Horrible, horrendous, that's funny. So how do we have reconciliation and decolonialism? So I often hear them said almost as if they're the same thing or the same word, which I disagree with. Reconciliation to me is actually like reintegrating the indigenous into our society. It's kind of like having a dialectic conversation, a bit, but without rejecting our culture. Decolonialism is much more radical, in my opinion. It is rejection of this culture that we are living in. Maybe even rejecting our language, rejecting our ontology, our axiology, and our epistemology. Much more radical shit. There's a teacher at NASCAD who was like, oh yeah, I'm decolonializing my practice. And what he meant by that was that he was using some green mediums, environmentally friendly. I mean, which I have nothing against environmentally friendly, but that's a far cry from decolonializing your practice. It's I don't know if it's as radical as a lot of people seem to think it is. I think decolonialization is very radical. And, when I first heard it, I thought it meant like everybody who has ancestry of Europeans should just go back. And I know some indigenous people think that, but or maybe even some colonialists too. I don't know. Probably very few. But I think that would be totally awful. As awful as it is that we're even here on this land and like, wasting their resources, their water sources, and destroying the planet, and genocides and residential schools. How do we? I think reconciliation is might be a step toward decolonialization, but to me they are very different things, and I don't think they should be equated with each other. I'll talk a little bit more about indigenous in a little bit. I was also going to talk about the anprim view on media. I think I'm going to skip it just because it's kind of like a lot to talk about. And a very quick example though, Avatar. It's obviously the aliens are the indigenous people. It's very loosely hidden, but by making it aliens, you can get away with a lot more racial stuff. And they totally did the white savior thing. White savior is an archetype, a very negative archetype that, a white person is going to come into a indigenous society and save them either from their own ways or from the rest of the colonizers. But the implication is that even though this white person might reject, be like, hey, no, we can't do genocide, that's bad, these people have a right to live, there's still this mentality of like, I'm different, I'm superior, and I can help. You know what I mean? Um, I mean, not inherently. I think you can recognize that these people are not so indifferent, not so different. I mean, um, and still help out, but like not as like that leading role. Uh, Highlight of the film, in terms of like making my argument, is that there's this special flying alien thing. I forget what they're called. That none of the indigenous Avatar people were able to capture, and they needed it to save the day. And of course, this fucking the white guy just like, I'm gonna rectify myself, and he gets it first try. That's a grand example of a white savior. The media depicting the supremacy, even if they're like rejecting colonialism or rejecting genocide, that there's still that inherent hierarchy that, yeah, his race is better than you or these people. Yeah. So that's it for Prim. I'm going to take a very, very, very quick pee break, and then I'll be back to talk about transhumanism. I'll be back to talk about transhumanism in just like a couple minutes. So don't leave. I mean, if you have to pee, leave. But yeah, I'll be like 30 seconds. Timing. I'm back. Okay, loud noise for a second. I love this thing so much. Jeez. Okay. Hello, everyone. I like that comment, Milkshake Turtle. I was reading it when I was in the washroom. Milkshake Turtle says, I'm trans. You'd be surprised, or perhaps not so much, at how so many of us are transhumanists. It's a good one. Transgenderists. Genderists. Yeah, we need to transcend the human body. I mean, first gender, then the human body. I mean, okay, actually imagine this. Okay, this is how I'll enter in the transhuman discussion of what transhumanism is. This is very utopian, but envision this for me. You're trans. You're a transsexual. Transgender. Sorry, you're transgender. And you want to transition. Imagine with the technology of transhumanism, you can transition into not only another gender, but maybe perhaps a new gender that nobody knows about. Perhaps you want to transition to a different form of being. Maybe you want to transition to a floating consciousness, formless, and just zipping along the universe. Am I talking about psychedelics? No, I'm talking about transhumanism. Okay, so transhumanism is this philosophy and this view that human technology, technological advancement is greatly exceeding biological, natural evolution. So that there's going to be, I mean, it's already happened that, our technology, are a part of our evolution, so that our bodies look very much the same from the hunter-gatherers that I was just talking about. Our bodies very much look the same to those ancestors. However, we look very different because of our clothes, because of our technology, such as glasses and our cell phones. As if you need an example, I don't know what I'm showing you. Yeah, so these are, you can see them as a part or an extension of the human body, and a part of our evolution, and it's epigenetics, you could consider it, or our technology is a new form of evolution that is actually capable of going much faster than genetic biological. So there's like 4 main areas when it comes to transhumanists. The acronym to remember is GRAIN, G-R-A-I-N. That stands for genetics, genetic technology, robotics, robotic technology, AI, which is artificial intelligence, and finally nanotechnology. These are very exciting areas of research and technology. I'm super into every one of them, although they can also be pretty frightening when you consider that how much of our humanity are we going to lose when you can replace your body with, or just parts of your body with robotic parts of your body. And that's the thing, like actually, in reality, we're transforming all the time. We're not the same person. Like, I'm not the same person as I was when I started this live stream. I'm much more loose. I feel like a different person now. That person who started this live stream is dead. This is me now. So really, switching out my eyeballs for robotic eyeballs wouldn't be that bad. It's not that large of a step. But yeah, more on that later. Artificial intelligence, that's the one technology where it's, we haven't gotten there yet, but it's like, it feels like it's the most, I reluctantly say spiritual aspect, like, or at least like the least materialistic. That's what I'll say. The most non-materialistic aspect of transhumanism is artificial intelligence, because it's not actually about the parts, you know? It's about when it gets to the point where you can't tell that it's a computer you're talking to. If you're like on the phone with somebody and you can't tell it's a human, they consider that artificial intelligence. I mean, they have tricked some people into like thinking robots are people on the phone. That has been done now because technology has gotten to that point. But you know, I think to really have true artificial intelligence, you need to like have somebody rigorously questioning and probing on the other line. Be like, is this human? And like, you know, if you try to do that with our current technology, I think you would pretty soon find out that it's a robot on the other end. So we're not there for artificial intelligence. But the thing is like, once we reach that point of artificial intelligence, a lot of transhumanists think this is basically the singularity of the end of history. Karl Marx talked about communism, like the final end point of communism would be the end of history. And transhumanists argue that artificial intelligence is the end of human history, because an artificial intelligence would be able to access time and be able to make all sorts of calculations in the blink of an eye and rapidly transform our way of life. We wouldn't even know what hit us if we had artificial intelligence, because like artificial intelligence would be able to, in basically no amount of time, be able to make a technology that is even greater than it. You know, it would just become so exponential once we really hit the artificial intelligence. But our technology is building up. There's like, I'm sure a lot of people feel this, not only with technology, but like with our climate crisis and all that shit, is that there's like this big buildup, like there's something big is going to happen very soon. I'm not saying it's the eschaton, what Terence McKenna talked about, but it's something, you know. I think the big thing with Terence McKenna and the eschaton that I kind of have debate about is that I'm not sure if this is like going to affect all planets. I don't see how it's affecting all planets, rather just like it's really affecting humans right now. But there is going to be like this huge break, and I'm going to get to that here real soon. What I mean by that when I talk about the transhumanist, the technological singularity. Sorry. We will blend in with machines until we no longer mostly biological. Yeah, exactly. And I think this is like the opposite of ableism. You know, you can really get back into nature once you have robotic legs, for example, or you know, once you're the appropriate gender that you feel comfortable in, or you know, transhumanism can aid in so many ills. Like I know it. Well, I'm going to get into the critiques of transhumanism again, but like it's also similarly criticized for being romantic. But technology is our best bet right now, I'm going to argue. I think it's disingenuous to call it the end. We'd only then be able to travel in space, create our own realities. I'd say it's more like the beginning. Very true. And if, if you have this totality kind of philosophy, the end is the beginning. I don't know. It's a singularity. Things are gonna. It's basically gonna be like a universal rebirth or something. It's gonna blow all the doors wide open so that do you equate infinity with nothingness? Basically, it's like does it just become white noise when faced with infinity, true infinity, or is it what's in front of you right now? Those are some deep philosophical questions right there. So some critiques of transhumanism. Let's begin this with the bourgeoisie dystopia that we're heading toward. Okay, so right now, with the capitalist system, transhumanist technological advancement is advancing primarily to suit the needs of the bourgeoisie, the upper class, the very few, the 1%. You get the drift. And if it helps us, if it's aiding us at all, it's peripheral right now because technology is being built for the higher class. And if we get any advancement at all, it's again primarily to advance them. An example of this is automation. It's something that should be liberating us. Why should anybody have to work as a cashier anymore? It's a useless job. We can just use machines. We don't need cashiers. Maybe just for maybe one for the odd elderly person that needs to do things old school. But really, there's no need for having cashiers, and there's a lot of other jobs that can be replaced with automation, with great technology. But right now, that's working against the lower class, the proletariat. It's really hurting us because we need those jobs to survive. We depend on jobs. So we're asking capitalists to create useless jobs just to give us something to do. And that totally overrides our identity, takes most of our time. And for what? It's fucking awful system. It doesn't make sense. Hate it. So yeah, I'll get a little bit more into the bourgeoisie dystopia in a little bit. The other criticism is that it's a utopian and idealist. Yes, yes, it is. There's one of the biggest one of the biggest debates in the left dialogue is whether we should have utopian visions and think of this far off future that oh yeah, someday we'll all be free, many generations from now, not in my lifetime. Versus we should just focus on what's here right now in the present. How can we make this world, our situation, better? What can we do right tomorrow morning to make things better? And again, I think there should be some dialectic conversation between them. You can't be too utopian and you can't be too in the moment, because if you're working in the moment, you're not really you gotta have some foresight, if you're totally utopian, you can totally lose connection with reality. So that's my opinion. And here's the other one. It's you're playing God. Technogaianism is playing God. Sorry, I just lost. I just had a mental break. Not a mental breakdown, just zone out. Here's the thing about playing God. God doesn't exist. sorry. There's just no proof of that. So that's like a big fundamental argument with that. But if you're, doing things that are seemingly unnatural or something that shouldn't be tampered with, I understand that fear, but I think it needs to be seen at this point as inevitable. And like, so by having the anarcho part of the transhumanism, that's ideally that's where the ethical side of it really comes from, is that we want a system that embraces this technology advancement, but not to advance the upper class, but to advance the mass, to like help as many people out as possible. What's the use of robotic limbs and organs coming out if nobody can afford them, or if the materials are unethically produced and by like freaking low wage labor, that kind of thing. So our economical system as it is right now, it is a fantasy. There's no way that like we can get that technology out to people in time. But if we are unhindered by our current economy to advance upper class, and like just like scientists can like do their passion and like advance technology, then like we would be unhindered. We would create so much so fast, and I think we'd be able to ethically source things, because like we'd be able to like listen to our heart and not with our wallet. You know, who fuck needs a wallet anymore anyways? Yeah, so I don't think you could stop people's curiosity to advance technology, and it's going to happen. And I think that whole playing God argument is kind of ableist in some sense, because like we have to advance technology to help people. And yeah, I think I will talk a little bit more about that when I get into these next couple bits. I think these three bits really mesh together. Benefits and downsides of automation, which I did talk about a little bit. I did address that. Tech advancement. I talked about that a little bit. AI and the singularity, existential reaction. Okay, so talking about the bourgeoisie, I'm going to show you something. I don't think I can give you sound. Here, I'm going to put the display capture back on. There. Here, I'll come over here. So now you can see my screen. I'm going to show you something that's very, sorry, that's not the right thing. This is something that's very exciting and very alarming. Hey, that's me. This is Elon Musk. This is a podcast. Sorry, not a podcast. This was a live event where he was launching Neuralink. I'm sure a lot of people already heard about this. I mean, this has almost reached 1 million views, but it's still not fuck. He is, in the top 50 richest people alive, and people think he's a hero for advancing technology and being cool and kind of relatable, and equate him to like Tony Stark, Iron Man. But what he's talking about in this video, this is sorry, Neuralink is a technology that they're going to, with this sewing machine like machine, that can very accurately detect your heartbeat and everything, and shoot this artificial wire, artificial neuron in between I think like your primal cortex, like your prime visionary cortex, and like that back area, like right in between the two hemispheres, and interject these electronic neurons. With this machine that can, they describe it like a sewing machine. It like is very accurate, very quick, virtually traumaticless, as it's described. And you can see how small this needle is. This has terrifying implications, terrifying and exciting implications. Wonder if there's anything else cool about this to show you. I just wanted to. Yeah, it's loading too much now. But yeah, you get the gist. So what? Oh shit! Sorry. What his plan is with this is to get an advancement on AI. Whereas before we were thinking about AI as in as like the computer is going to exceed human intelligence, but it might catch us off guard in the way that human brains are actually physically for the first time going to merge with robotics, so that they tentatively say this at the very end. People are asking them about animal testing, like how far have you gone with animal testing? And they tentatively revealed that they've been testing on chimps. They try to be ethical as possible, but they have been testing on chimps, and they've gotten a chimp, to move a cursor on the screen with its brain. The implications of digital telekinesis, once we can get to a point where we can literally create a whole new mind within our brain. We could create virtual realities, possibly. We can have all sorts of augmented reality. We could fastly evolve our brain to see further or wider color spectrum, possibly with bionic eyes. That this is what Elon Musk say. Damn, that's like Planet of the Apes. Sorry. Yeah, maybe now it's a good time to show you this. I got these goggles, these VR goggles. Show you. So I can put these on and then use my phone to do VR, right? This is how we envision VR, and I can like walk around virtual rooms as an avatar, right? And the avatar I can change whenever I want. I can change my username whenever I want, and you know, in this virtual world, you don't have to be bound by capitalism either. But obviously, we can't live in a virtual world with just goggles, right? However, when we have bionic eyes, bionic nerves, synthetic wire neurons, the boundary between impossible and impossible becomes more and more like nil. We basically become immortal. And so, I mean, not to give too many spoilers, but in the last season of Adventure Time, they find a society where the humans were under a virtual reality in like this pod, and they were living many lifetimes in these pods. So this could be a form of utopia. However, who's going to tend to the bodies, right? And what's going to be of the planet, right? You know, I can envision. Well, part of me is thinking that the way history is going to go now is that like the planet is literally going to be fucked by climate change. Sorry, excuse my language. Is you humans are going to destroy the planet, and just in the nick of time, we'll find out how to live eternity, transcend time through Neuralink, basically. um, because truth is, our perception of time is fixed at this specific moment to be to feel very consistent. Um, but in reality, you can live many lifetimes within the span of like nanoseconds. The amount of information that can be passed through technology and digital transmission of information. I'm talking like quantum leaping. Um, some people are like making arguments that like quantum physics hasn't really like aided or helped human in the everyday life. Like, who nobody understands quantum physics, and I don't. It's not really relevant to my day to day. But in reality, it did greatly aid in our technology. The reason why our cell phones and computers can register so much is because it does, to some degree, take advantage of quantum technology. Quantum computers are also a thing now too. So without going too deep into it, basically it's a string of information very, very quick of like 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 0, you know, that like binary, the very fundamental of information that everything is. And that's like transferred digitally. With quantum entanglement, you can take advantage of this very peculiar quality of the physics in the quantum level, that it does behave quite differently, where you know atoms aren't equivalent to an object because they can in zero time transfer between a boundary that's faster than light speed. It's instantaneous, like an energy barrier. It can transfer. It can also be in superpositions where it's two things at once, and the superpositions is what quantum computers are taking advantage of. Superpositions of being in two states at once, you can get information so much faster than having to go 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, because the information would be like both at once. It's like it's very complicated and like mind-boggling. I'm not a quantum physicist, but yeah, let's read what some of these comments have been saying. Blend with machines, yeah. We'd be able to travel in space, create our own realities. Yes, I think space isn't the frontier, but our psychology is. We can create infinite galaxies in our psychology, or in our brains are capable of that. And if you ever smoked DMT, you would know this. Although I do think eventually maybe we can go into space too. Can you comment on virtual reality unless it's too off topic? Oh, okay, I think I did there. God doesn't exist, thank you. How do you deal with the depression, hopelessness that comes from the almost inevitability, terrible results of capitalism, i.e. fascism, ecological poverty? That is a real question. I'm having a very tough time, to be honest, if you haven't been able to tell. I will talk about this to like in conclusion of the video about like our current state of the world. So I'm gonna get back to you on that. But yeah, I will sympathize and validate that it is very depressing and very enraging, and it's all sorts of emotions comes up. Yeah, it's horrifying and depressing to think about politics, especially the history of colonialization, which I've been researching. It's particularly traumatic to learn about. Damn, that's like the planet. I fully support the advance of technology under workers' control. Yes, exactly. I, that's the point I wanted to make. I think I skipped it again. Uh, Elon Musk is bougie. He's top 30, I think, richest people alive. The reason why that's so bad is because nobody should have that much power. Being that rich is inherently violent because you're taking food out of people's mouths. You're taking shelter over people's heads. He could literally solve world hunger many times over, but instead he sends a car up into space. This guy needs to be decapitated. Oh, I'm just joking. Ha ha. Um, Damn, how much was that? Oh, this thing? This is okay, this is actually hilarious. This is some praxis you can take part in as leftists. If you go to a thrift store, just switch the sticker, the price sticker, with something that's much cheaper. Or just steal it. This was $10 at a thrift store, but we got it for $2.99. And it's fucking awesome, I gotta say. You need to download an app for the 3D effect to work, but it's really cool. Yeah, and obviously this is really clunky, but like it's going to be so great once we're actually able to enter into these virtual spaces. Like your form would be boundless outside of the human form, because you could actually embody the environment too and objects, and it's just so boundless. It's like it's literally incomprehensible. We can transcend dimensions, my guy. The implications of technology are extremely psychedelic and fascinating. I totally agree. It's like DMT is almost like a premonition of it. Um, However, the more technology develops, the more I feel the need to go into the woods to walk away from the internet and cell phones. Yes, and that's where the dialectic of anprims come in. Uh, Thank you for highlighting that, Alan Mazza. There's uh, humans have dialectic needs. That's actually why I think humans are so conflicted a lot of the times, and why we justify terrible things. I'm going to turn this down a little bit because I think I peaked a few times. Um, Sorry. Yeah, like we have many needs. So like there's a need for like new technology, and think that's good. But then there's also this need to like go back to our roots and just like figure out who we are. Take psychedelics and get back into nature. I should comment on how psychedelics now are working for transhumanists. Many of these people in Silicon Valley are using psychedelics, and all these innovators are getting very creative ideas through psychedelics, and it's just been amazing. The internet was actually invented, or greatly inspired by LSD. The idea that people can be interconnected through this web space was just like a very psychedelic concept, and it still is. The fact that we're able to transcend location and interact with each other is actually pretty remarkable. I'm going to be another half an hour probably. Let's aim for another 10 to 20 minutes. Yeah, so we need to have a dialectic conversation between these things. Um, can you comment on how lucid dreaming and astral projection fit into your concepts? Um, astral projection seems to be, I don't know, I don't really see the point in doing it through meditation and like really like breaking. It just seems like a lot of effort um, to get to that non-effort point of meditation. I think I'm partial because I find it hard to meditate, like having ADD and yeah, basically because I have ADD and PTSD. Um, Meditating can often be uncomfortable and irritating. So like I really admire people that can meditate to the point of being able to astral project, but I just don't think it's very accessible for everyone, you know? Whereas DMT, um, believe it or not, or like mushrooms, I feel like are a lot more accessible, or salvia is more accessible, just because like it is on command. You can go as far as you want to go. Um, you consent as you take your dose. You take your dose very cautiously, and that's consenting to the trip. That's how I see it. Um, but as for astral projection, you're just like you really have to will it into, or really like have to like relax into it. It takes a lot of training. It's difficult. Is what I'm trying to say. um, it sounds amazing. Lucid dreaming is something I'm still trying to get the hang of. But yeah, again, these psychedelic states I think are very illuminating to like, try to understand our unconscious is a way into uh, reintegrate that into the collective humanity, and I think it will do like very good to take that time to like reflect on yourself. Um, Maybe I'll comment before I leave about psychedelics and why I think that they can greatly aid in politics and how they can also harm politics, I guess. Um, can you imagine what would happen if a person highly trained with quantum physics took DMT? So fascinating. I think some people have too, and yeah, I think my intuition says that like there must be something happening at the quantum mechanical level, um, the quantum level, I should say. Um, it involves those mechanics because that's the only way I can explain the psychedelic experience is that um, if superpositions and a quantum teleportation is possible, that's the only thing in science I have seen that could possibly explain how you can transport into a different reality. But it would argue that consciousness is quantum to some degree. And as a layperson, it makes sense to me, right? um, I get inspired by studying the history of class struggle, such as the Bolshevik Revolution, which shows that a better world is possible. Yeah, I will agree that the Russian Revolution was glorious, and there was a lot of successful attributes of it. A lot of things, though, not negative things too. But you know, I think the negative parts of the Russian Revolution and the USSR are overemphasized. I don't think they should be ignored either. But yeah, I think what they succeeded in should be brought more into light. Um, they did some really great stuff, and it's amazing revolution. I like to keep jugs of water for homeless people in my car. They're like 39 cents per gallon, super cheap, way to help, even if you're broke as fuck. Yeah, that sounds ethical. I'm all for that. Suffering and poverty and it's class struggle is real, man. Um, I don't subscribe or ever believe that homeless people are just lazy. I reject laziness as a thing in general, to be honest. um, my hope is that we can advance in harmony with our environment and come up with the better ways of doing so through use of psychedelics. Yes, exactly. Psychedelics are a great way for innovation. Um, that was my main argument with when it comes to transhumanism. I wouldn't highly recommend meditating to a timer. Uh, oh, I agree that doing astral projection can be extremely difficult. I have not quite reached the threshold. Lucid dreaming is also difficult. I have had many spontaneous lucid dreams, but psychs are important because they are immediate. Exactly, that's what I was trying to say. It stands to reason that the brain interprets the interaction between all the electrons hopping between barriers and zipping back and forth between unintended neurons is real quantum input. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm leaning to, especially with the or a theory of consciousness. Although like it does stink a little bit of woo, just to be weary of it, just because Stuart Hameroff does associate a lot with like, or has associated with like people who believe they're telepathic and stuff like that, and the woo crowd. So that's like just like a red flag generally. If like you really want to be like materialist and rational about these things, but honestly, like thus far, the or theory is pretty fucking solid, and just the main idea being that consciousness can be quantum, or like invalidating that in some level would be very beneficial way or very convenient to describe the psychedelic experience. Stalin betrayed the revolution. Okay, we won't get too far into the Russian Revolution shit, but yes, uh, Trotsky and Lenin definitely had a better idea. Actually, you know what? Maybe I should just address this, because why the hell not? This is the big difference between communists and anarcho-communists, is the idea of the state as a transition into communism. Because true communism, there is no state, and there is no centralization, and there's no need for money or an economy. The problem is that realistically, materialistically, if you're going to have a communist state, it has to be a phase out of capitalism to some degree. And you have to also compete with capitalism's dominant force over the world, which definitely puts up major barriers when it comes to world trade and all sorts of other things. So the communist point of view, or like for Marxist-Leninists, what happened with Russia is that they established a dictatorship of the proletariat. That's where they flipped the hierarchy upside down, and the idea of the majority, the mass class of people would be the proletariat, the workers, the people who actually tangibly, materialistically make the product, and not these fucking entrepreneurs and landlords and stuff like that. These people who always use usury and take advantage of people, and that's the whole capitalistic game. So to overthrow that, and sorry, well, almost got lost track there. So you have to set up a dictatorship of the proletariat state, and it's a dictatorship because you have to be very like tenacious against capitalism, and you have to really unite your forces and defend yourself. I mean, idealistically, you could just like lay back on your fucking hammock, but obviously you're going to be invaded by people whose interests of like extracting as much profit off of any valuable resource, and exploiting people and stuff like that. They're going to come in with full force, as history tells, the history of colonialism. And this is where it gets really hard, because with ANCOMs, which I most commonly attribute myself to be, is that we think we should just go avoid the dictatorship of the proletariat and go straight to communism. That goes straight to deindustrialization, straight to non-hierarchy, and so therefore, like, I think syndicalism might be a better transition than straight anarcho-communism. And this is something I still haven't really come to terms with, because the problem with the state is that there's too much probability that it can be infiltrated by Stalin, by a power-hungry person that wants to like it happened with the French Revolution, with the French Revolution was kind of a bougie revolution anyways, but as soon as the revolution happened, then comes Napoleon Bonaparte, and he just leads people into wars again, and it's like, things are slightly different, but not really. And Stalin, like, there's like still like a lot of great things about communist Russia, even though it was more just socialist. They were like, it's a stage into communism. You know, people say like, no, that Russia is communism, or the USSR was communism, but you have to see how it's like actually a stage into communism, because full communism can't really be achieved until capitalism isn't a threat anymore, because then there's no need for a state, there's no need for an economy, and then that's why they say it's like the end of history, because you know it's like that's the best state for humans, the ideal state, the inevitable uprising. Um, so like yeah, this is the main argument, is like um, if we do have a intermediate state of dictatorship of the proletariat, um, which sounded really great when Lenin wrote about it, and it was going great until Stalin came, and you know, like it was going great with Mao's communist China to some degree, until Mao died and somebody else came in and basically rewrote the policies to like totally benefit capitalists, and now look at China. It's like fucking like the worst place to be in a factory. It's like so dehumanizing the way a lot of people are in these factories. I mean, it's dehumanizing here too, but I mean, like it's particularly bad in China, and hence why so many things are made over there. So like, yeah, and this is, you know, I'm just like somebody that's like still learning about this stuff. My inclination was be like, oh shit, I don't want Stalin and go straight to communism, but now I'm not sure, because like you do have to defend against capitalism. How do you do that? Um, yeah, so like there's a lot more to think about, but I think I like the idea of anarchy a little bit, because unfortunately communism has been so heavily associated with the USSR and China, and you know, all the uh, third world countries that the USA fucking destroyed when they try to go socialist. It like really deters a lot of people from being communist. So I thought maybe anarchist kind of has that point of view, where it seems really fresh for most people. Most people don't even think that there are, or there's a possibility of an anarchist society, let alone there has been in history. Um, so yeah, just like that's food for thought. That's the main difference between ancoms and communists. Um, and yeah, like so my stance on the dictatorship of the proletariat is still kind of wavering. I gotta be honest. I don't really know. Um, if I was full tilt Marxist communist and I was sure of myself, then yeah. But my main grief is like, how do you stop a Stalin from coming in? That's the main thing. Yes. So I think we talked enough about technogaianism, um, or sorry, transhumanism. We're about to talk about technogaianism. Um, but the main I I wasted too much time talking about those differences. Sorry about that. Getting back on topic of transhumanism, if we can, with this singularity, this technological singularity, transcend human form, and you know, time is boundless, form means essential, and the existential reaction is very valid. I don't know if I have more to say about that right now, because I can't think of anything to say about it right now, but I just want to validate that existential reaction. It's what does it mean if it is true that all possibilities already exist, and you know, that it really uh, puts a nihilistic light on things. Um, is there like how to live in that absence of meaning? Um, uh, I do kind of like, at least personally, I find my meaning in relieving suffering of others. Um, yeah, just relieving suffering is my main perpetuating thing. I know that if, you know, if we all just like end it, then uh, that would that wouldn't stop any suffering, and there's only a limited amount of suffering I could help ease, you know. But that's the reason why I put up with life's more negative or downsides. Okay, so technogaianism. This is where I'm trying to get the anprim technogaianism together. This is definitely more transhuman than anprim, but but yeah, this is an example of how technology can start to aid in reversing the environment. Instead of just abandoning technology, trying to like find technology that can actually um, help reintegrate us back into nature. And you know, automation is one aspect of that. You know, um, I think that could really relieve a lot of suffering. Um, so environmental monitoring, geoengineering, genetic engineering, um, molecular nanotechnology. Um, so this is one concept that's been tossed around, is that if we can develop a molecular nanotechnology that can convert garbage into recyclable material, that would be a great example of technogaianism, of like trying to like really not like, I really like the Gaian philosophy. It doesn't have to be metaphysical and spiritual if you are materialist. Gaianism can still be a materialist thing. Sorry, I keep clicking on the wrong window. Um, just so that you're not like scared off by me talking about Gaianism if you're like uber materialist. It doesn't have to be a spiritual thing, but it also can be if you're spiritual too. Um, but like, reason why I really like Gaianism is that it not only tries to unite humanity, but also reunite humanity with Earth as a whole, you know, and all life on Earth, you know, um, trying to see the similarities and like promote life in like the most feasible and way to like ease suffering. We can use biotech that can introduce microbes to devour hazardous waste, for example, and really something that would be really important right now is to like try to find ways to reverse climate change. Right now, it's like, as far as I can tell, right now, we're fucking doomed. Um, uh, but if we can find a way to extract greenhouse gases from the atmosphere and like kind of like introduce a restabilization, I mean, our technology is nowhere near that, and like that's the trick, is how we're gonna get this technology before we all die, and it's gonna have to take the end of capitalism and like a lot of steps to reverse this progress, or anti-progress. I don't know. Progress towards our destruction is what I'm talking about. um, so, primitivism aiding transhumanism. I wrote down ecosexuals and technosexuals. That's not even a point to really even bring up, but there is such thing as people that are attracted to nature, like sexually, and there's also people that are sexually attracted to technology. And I think that's a great example of the diversity of humans. And you know, if we identify with like being totally for uh, the feral wild earth Gaian state, and try to like separate that from the people who are really into robotics and the digital sphere, if you try to like separate that like from being, that's when like all this fighting becomes in. I did a thought experiment where I commented in the anarcho-primitivist subreddit and the transhumanist anarcho-transhumanist subreddit, and I asked the same question: how do you feel about technogaianism being a bridge between these two concepts? Transhumanists were, obviously, because they like technology, were much more enthusiastic about this, and they were also like more able to admit that they do have leanings to like also, you know, go camping and shit like that and reconnect with nature. Anprims, the ones that commented on this post at least, mostly all rejected it very, very fiercely. All technology is bad inherently. You can't have ethically sourced technology. But I'm arguing that you can have ethically sourced technology if it weren't for capitalism, because capitalism exploits all resources. But how do you, take an indigenous approach to this, where you honor each thing that you take from the planet, everything that you consume, you honor, appreciate, and make sure that you don't take enough that will inhibit it. For example, there's a horde of buffalo. You only shoot, or you only kill what your village needs, or like what your community needs. You don't take any more of what you need. That's what I'm trying to say. That's kind of a weird analogy. Why am I being so critical of myself? Yeah, I think there is a way to like be able to build technology in an ethical way if it weren't for capitalism, is my point. I wrote down Mormons question mark. I can't remember why. I think there are a surprising amount of Mormons in the technogaianism field and transhumanist field, which I just thought was surprising. Because you think Mormons are more traditionalist and kind of narrow-minded, I guess, just because of their strict beliefs or faith. Is spirituality necessary? This is something I don't know if I want to talk about just because it's getting late. But that's definitely something to consider, though, and something I'll leave with all of you. Something I hear a lot is that like what the world is lacking right now is spirituality, and this is something I'm wrestling with. I don't know, because like I haven't seen a strong enough correlation between spirituality and morality. I've met a lot of materialist nihilists that are just as compassionate as people, or sometimes more compassionate than people who think that there's just like one consciousness and we're all God in mind, and spirits can leave your body and transcend dimensions or whatever, which might be true, but you're making assumptions at that point, because if you're being materialistic, you're only basing it off of material evidence. So yeah, that's ultimately my point. I don't really know if spirituality is what we need right now in these like trying times, like, which also, like, I'm sorry, again, that leads into the political depression that you were talking about earlier. Who was it that was saying it? Was it Milkshake? Yeah, Milkshake, yeah. Milkshake Turtle. Trade for new innovations, question mark. I'm not sure what you're referring to there. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so ending thoughts. Are we doomed? Honestly, I'm starting to think so. I think, there's all sorts of climate protests and stuff like that. I have the feeling that it's already too late. We entered the wrong probability, and I think we may already be doomed. But I'm not entirely pessimistic about it. I still think we need to resist and fight as much as possible. If anything, this could be like one of the most glorious endings to human history, of all the possible probability dimensions. That if we're gonna end, let's end on like the most glorious way possible. Not like crying in a corner, but fighting with our last breath, and watching the sunset. Overly poetic, perhaps. What is some practice that we can do in the meantime? What can we do, like, right now? And this is there's some typical leftist things that I could say is that, like, join your local socialists. There's like there'll probably be a group of socialists um, in your area. Uh, in Halifax here, there's a lot of anarchists that hang around Radstorm, and so that's really cool. Um, Anarchists are always cool with me, unless they're ANCAPs. um, so yeah, get in touch with your local community in terms of leftists. Community is really strong. Also, unionize your workplace. Take part in slacktivism. Slacktivism is basically where you give as little labor as possible to the people that is purchasing your labor, because they're already paying you lower than what you actually deserve. That's the basis of capitalism. That, like, if you were actually given the full extent of your labor, what the true value of your labor, um, there wouldn't be any employers, because no business could succeed off of that. So really give them as little labor as possible. Also steal staplers and shit like that. Um, but in terms of like my advice for people is learn the indigenous history of your area, which nation and land you're occupying. This land has been stolen from indigenous peoples. They were using it as a part of their survival, their territories. This is their resources, and they are taking care of it in harmony. We've come here, totally isolated them, shut them out, established these huge skyscrapers, and are like hell bent on destroying the planet, and are totally ignorant to that because of our lost connection with the Gaian totality that is humans' connection to nature. So learn indigenous history of the area, of how your colony came to be there, and how the indigenous relations interplayed with that. And then get in touch with your indigenous community of your area. Visit reserves and go to the powwows and talk to people. Try to learn as much as possible. Because I think this revolution might be like best. I'm not 100% on this, but like it might be best to actually join forces with the indigenous people, and like that might be a way to like reject our culture by accept going to their culture, but that's on like their and with their permission, of course. They have reason to be weary of white settlers and perpetrators in the community because of the genocidal history. Um, so that's like a little bit of some amprim praxis there. It's not saying that indigenous communities in your area are primitive, but rather learning how being able to live in harmony with nature, and how like we used to do that, and how like we've been stripped of that, and then joining forces with the culture that might still have some string of some traditions left, whereas Western people, it's a lot harder to come by those types of worldviews. So like there's a lot of valuable stuff in terms of nature reintegration within indigenous peoples. Like all the nations I've ever looked into all have a very great relationship with nature, and hence why they were able to sustain themselves for so long. I wonder why we're not able to sustain ourselves. And yeah, so the transhumanist side of that would be to learn coding. Um, yeah, if the bourgeoisie are like making technology, hackers are like the best counter force to that. You learn the technology as much as possible, and then you can start rewriting things, and you can start tampering with things that are like tilted in their favor. Um, I wish I knew more about that, but that would be really cool. Learn coding and learn about technology, and also make art and find ways to communicate with people with that go outside our current linguistic matrix of English, as demonstrated before with primitivism. Like that's not the best word. We could really use a way to describe these things without having these words, these heavy associations and stuff like that. So thank you so much to all of my patrons and all of you out there. I think I'm gonna start doing this weekly, possibly. Maybe I'm not. I don't think I'm gonna commit to weekly, but I'm gonna do this more often. I already have a Halloween one planned, which is gonna be for next week, which I'm really looking forward to. I'm glad to have done this, and I believe I've hit all my major talking points. I'm sorry if I'm overly pessimistic about this in terms of our doom, but I think we need to keep fighting no matter what. And I would love to be proven wrong. It's just things are just so far tilted now. It's really hard to even me being very what's the opposite of pessimistic? Even me being very optimistic and idealist, it's still hard to realistically see a way out of their current conundrum. And so it might be just a process of continuing resisting and just enjoying what this is for what it is. And yeah, love to keep exploring these concepts. I hope you all enjoyed learning a little bit more about anarchy, and or if you already knew about this, like if there's some new perspectives that have come out of it. I hope you consider more about the dialectics too. Dialectics are very important over binaries. Things aren't black and white. Things are very complex. Sorry, I'm going to get back into media, but the way Hollywood always implies that there's a superhero and supervillain, antagonist and protagonist. But sometimes those kind of hierarchies do, or archetypes, I should say, do arise in our world. But things are a lot more dialectic than that. Can I really truly say that these CEOs, these 100 company CEOs that are destroying the planet, are they actually purely evil? It's some very hard ethical thinking needs to be done. And I don't really have an answer, but I think dialectics will help a lot more than being a centrist and just thinking everything is overly relativistic. When you're overly relativistic or being a centrist, that's when you equate everything to being equal. Like, how can you really say communism is better than fascism when people die either way? It takes a lot more deeper understanding and dialectic analysis of these things. So that'll be my ending point. Thank you all so very, very much. Fuck this current system that we're in. It's so horrible. I love you all very much. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned some new cool things, and I'll see you next time in my next podcast or next live stream. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you all very much for watching, and thank you for my patrons, and thank you for sticking with me. I'm going to be making more live streams and new cool concepts soon. Because of the long delay, I don't know if I can read your last comments. The last one is, fact is they aren't evil, just bad for the environment. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. That's where the dialectic comes in. It's just like, it's kind of like a me or you situation, but much, 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 much more grand. Like, really, compare 100 people, 100 CEOs, to all of life on the planet, all the other life on the planet, literally, including that 100 people, So, so some heads roll and everybody else gets to live, Like, I hate violence. I consider myself a limited pacifist. I would rather there be no violence, but when people won't stop destroying the planet, you have to intervene by force. And that's the power of uniting as a proletariat, as a community, as workers unite, and that's where the power is. Thank you. I'm glad you thought that was dope. Thank you. Nem Holiday. I'm glad you sat through the whole thing. I really appreciate it. And Maza, the message was retracted, so I'm not. So sorry I didn't read whatever you said, or maybe you didn't mean to write anything. Rip. Rest in peace. Thank you, Jack Wilson. You rest in peace too. Thank you for watching. Yeah. Thank you all for watching, and please do take care. I hope you enjoyed.